A lesser-known detail about the psychological torment involves the last meal ritual, which was often not a comfort, but another form of humiliation. The condemned might be offered a meal, but it would be public, observed by guards, and often accompanied by mocking comments or symbolic gestures that emphasize their impending doom. It was a final, cruel reminder of what they were about to lose, and a last chance for the state to assert its dominance. It's like being offered your favorite meal, but you have to eat it in front of a firing squad. You see, Roman public executions were not simply about dispensing justice or punishing criminals. They were elaborate, theatrical spectacles designed to serve multiple, often terrifying, purposes. They were a brutal demonstration of state power, a stark warning to anyone who dared to defy Roman authority, and a chilling form of entertainment for the masses. The arena, whether the Colosseum, a local amphitheater, or even a public forum, became a stage for death, meticulously choreographed for maximum impact. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the condemned maintained their dignity or defied their tormentors in their final moments. While some ancient accounts emphasize the stoicism of martyrs or philosophers, others describe utter despair and terror. The subjective experience of facing such an ordeal, and the ways individuals coped with it, remains a complex and often unanswerable question for scholars. You walk through the dark corridors beneath the arena, hearing the distant murmurs of the growing crowd. You catch glimpses of the condemned, their faces etched with terror, their bodies often already weakened by imprisonment and torture. They are not just criminals, they are props in a macabre drama, their suffering intended to send a powerful message. The execution was not a quick, private affair. It was a prolonged public agony, designed to instill fear and reinforce the absolute power of Rome. The condemned were often forced to confess their crimes publicly, or to acknowledge the justice of their punishment. This was not about seeking truth. It was about reinforcing the state's narrative. Their final words, if they were allowed any, were often manipulated or silenced if they did not serve the purpose of the spectacle. Their voices, like their bodies, were controlled by Rome. Consider the sheer variety and inventiveness of these executions. While crucifixion is perhaps the most infamous, it was by no means the only method. The Romans employed a horrifying array of techniques, each designed to maximize suffering, humiliation, and the theatrical impact of death. You might witness damnatio et bestias condemnation to the beasts where the condemned were thrown to hungry lions, bears, or other wild animals. This wasn't a quick mauling, it was often a drawn-out spectacle, with the animals sometimes goaded to prolong the agony. You see the condemned, their voice hoarse from torture, forced to utter words of confession or remorse, even if they were innocent. Their final public act is one of submission, a forced validation of the very system that is about to destroy them. This final act of control, of breaking the spirit before the body, was a chilling testament to Roman power. You might observe a condemned man, stripped naked, pushed into the arena, his screams mingling with the roars of the beasts and the cheers of the crowd. He tries to fight, to run, but there is no escape. The animals, starved for days, tear at his flesh, their claws and teeth ripping him apart. The crowd, meanwhile, revels in the spectacle, their bloodlust seemingly insatiable. It's like watching a really bad horror movie, but it's real, and you're in the front row. You realize that the journey to death for the condemned in ancient Rome was far from a simple, quick end. It was a meticulously choreographed ordeal, designed to maximize suffering, humiliation, and terror, from the agonizing wait in the prison cell to the brutal interrogations, from the public procession of shame to the final, dehumanizing acts before the execution itself. Every step was a deliberate act of psychological and physical torment. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a stage for death, where human suffering was transformed into a chilling lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the screams of the condemned and the chilling preparations that defined the awful truth of Roman public executions. Think about the psychological impact on the condemned. They were not just facing death, they were facing public humiliation, terror, and often a prolonged, agonizing end. They knew their suffering was intended as a lesson, a warning to others. This psychological torture, the stripping away of dignity before death, was a crucial part of the punishment. You've just endured the horrifying prelude to Roman executions. Understanding that the stripping away of dignity and the psychological torment were as brutal as death itself. As the imagined screams and the chilling preparations fade, and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the immediate horror to its lasting impact. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the enduring legacy of Rome's public executions, a pervasive atmosphere of fear, a constant reinforcement of state control, and a chilling testament to how a society can be shaped by the spectacle of death. You might see a condemned man, forced to participate in a mock mythological scene, perhaps playing a character who is torn apart by wild animals in a play. The line between theatrical performance and brutal reality blurs, and the audience understands that the actor will indeed die, horribly for their entertainment. This fusion of myth, drama, and execution made the spectacle even more chilling, turning human suffering into a morbid form of art. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen, years after witnessing a particularly gruesome execution in the Colosseum. The specific details might have blurred, but the visceral memory, the primal fear, remains. Every time you pass the amphitheater, every time you hear news of a new criminal being condemned, that chilling sensation returns. These events weren't just isolated incidents, they were carefully woven into the fabric of Roman life, designed to leave an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The public nature of these executions was paramount. They were not hidden away, they were announced, advertised, and attended by vast crowds, from senators to slaves. Everyone was meant to witness the consequences of defying Rome, to internalize the lesson that the state's power was absolute and its justice merciless. The arena became a classroom for terror, teaching obedience through fear. You see, the legacy of public executions was, first and foremost, a legacy of fear. The Romans understood that a populace living in fear was a populace that was easier to control. The constant threat of public, agonizing death for defying the state, for committing crimes, or even for simply holding unpopular beliefs, served as a powerful deterrent. It was a constant, unspoken warning that permeated every aspect of daily life, from the bustling markets to the quiet homes. It's like living in a city where every street corner has a giant, flashing sign that says, "Don't even think about jaywalking," or else you hear the excited chatter of the crowd, the hawkers selling food and drink, the betting on which animal will kill first. It's a festive atmosphere, a day out for many, yet it revolves entirely around the brutal demise of human beings. This casual acceptance of extreme violence, this normalization of public torture, is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. You observe the subtle ways this fear manifests. A slave, contemplating escape, remembers the crucified bodies lining the Appian Way. A citizen, disgruntled with a magistrate's ruling, thinks twice before speaking out publicly. A Christian, tempted to openly practice their faith, recalls the stories of those thrown to the beasts. The fear was not always overt. Often, it was a quiet, internal calculation, a self-censorship born from the knowledge of Rome's merciless justice. One common historical fact that highlights the severity of Roman public executions is crucifixion. Reserved primarily for slaves, rebels, and non-Roman citizens, it was a slow, agonizing death designed to inflict maximum suffering and public humiliation. The condemned could hang for days exposed to the elements, dying from exhaustion, dehydration, and asphyxiation. Consider the reinforcement of state power. Every execution was a grand, public reaffirmation of the emperor's authority, the Senate's decrees, and the legion's might. The state was not an abstract concept. It was a tangible, terrifying force that could seize a human life, inflict unimaginable suffering, and display its power for all to see. This constant demonstration of ultimate control was crucial for maintaining order across a vast and diverse empire, constantly reminding its citizens and subjects of who held the reins of power. A lesser-known detail about the theatricality of Roman executions involves the use of elaborate stage sets and props. For Damnatio ad Bestias, the arena might be transformed into a mythological landscape, with trees, rocks, and even artificial rivers, to create a more immersive and dramatic setting for the condemned's demise. This wasn't just about killing, it was about creating a memorable, terrifying spectacle. It's like designing a really elaborate escape room. But the exit is death. You might see the emperor, or a high-ranking magistrate, presiding over an execution, his face impassive, his gesture signaling life or death. The crowd's cheers are not just for the spectacle, but for the power he embodies. This ritualized display of power, repeated countless times across the empire, solidified the image of Rome as an unchallengeable, all-encompassing authority. It's like a really intense, very bloody monthly board meeting, where the CEO reminds everyone who's in charge by making an example out of a dissenting employee. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the precise psychological effects of these spectacles on the Roman populace. While some argue that they desensitized the public to violence and reinforced state control, others suggest that they also fostered a sense of community, a shared experience of power and order, even if it was built on brutality. The complex interplay of fear, entertainment, and social cohesion remains a nuanced area of scholarly discussion. Think about the normalization of violence over generations. The constant exposure to extreme public brutality in the amphitheaters and forums desensitized the Roman populace. What might initially have been shocking became commonplace, then expected. And finally, a form of entertainment. This normalization of violence had profound implications for Roman society, fostering a culture where cruelty was often celebrated and human suffering was a spectacle. The condemned were often paraded through the streets before their execution, further enhancing the public humiliation. They might be stripped, mocked, and subjected to the jeers and insults of the crowd. This procession was a deliberate act of dehumanization, stripping the individual of their dignity before their final public agony. You hear the casual chatter of families planning a day at the games, discussing which criminals will be executed, which animals will be used. Children grow up witnessing these horrors, their minds shaped by the constant exposure to death as entertainment. The lines between justice, punishment, and brutal amusement blurred, creating a society that, to modern eyes, appears chillingly callous. It's like your favorite TV show is a live execution, and you're upset if they cancel it. You see the condemned man, his head bowed, his body trembling, as he is led through the forum past the very monuments that symbolize Roman justice and order. He is a living lesson, a walking example of what happens when you cross the mighty Roman state. The crowd's reaction, a mixture of condemnation and morbid curiosity, is chilling. The legacy also extended to the very landscape of the empire. Public execution sites, the crosses along roads, the Tarpeian Rock. The arenas themselves became grim landmarks, physical reminders of Rome's power and its willingness to use extreme force. These places were not just locations, they were symbols, imbued with the memory of suffering and the chilling message of state control. Even the bodies of the executed were often left on display, or thrown into the Tiber River, denied proper burial. This was a final act of humiliation, a denial of dignity even in death, designed to send a clear message that those who defied Rome would find no peace, even in the afterlife. Their very remains were used as a deterrent. You see a traveler on the Appian Way, passing by the decaying bodies of crucified rebels, their forms silhouetted against the sky. He might avert his gaze, but the image is burned into his mind, a silent warning against any thoughts of defiance. The very geography of Rome was marked by these grim monuments, ensuring that the legacy of fear was ever present. You realize that Roman public executions were far more than just punishments. They were carefully crafted theatrical events, designed to instill terror, reinforce state power, and provide a chilling form of entertainment for the masses. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a stage for death, where human suffering was transformed into a spectacle, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd and the screams of the condemned that defined the awful truth of Roman public executions. One common historical fact that illustrates the lasting legacy of fear is the Roman practice of using public executions to suppress rebellions. The crucifixion of Spartacus's followers, for example, created a chilling precedent, ensuring that future slave revolts were rare and quickly crushed. As the memory of that brutal display of power lingered for centuries, you've just witnessed the chilling theatricality of Roman public executions. understanding that they were designed to be far more than mere punishments. As the imagined screams of the condemned fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the sheer brutality to the profound, often insidious, purpose behind these terrifying spectacles. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of their ultimate goal to instill fear, reinforce state power, and maintain social control through a relentless, visceral display of Roman authority. A lesser-known detail about the enduring impact involves the use of execution narratives in Roman literature and rhetoric. Accounts of famous executions, whether of criminals, rebels, or martyrs, were often recounted and embellished, not just as historical records, but as moral lessons or propaganda. These narratives, passed down through generations, continued to instill fear and reinforce state ideology long after the actual events. It's like a really popular true crime podcast, but it's government-sponsored, and the goal is to make sure you never commit a crime. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen, perhaps a shopkeeper, a farmer, or a laborer, going about your daily life. The news of an upcoming execution spreads through the city like wildfire. You might grumble about the time it takes, or the crowds it draws, but you know, deep down, that you will likely attend. It's not just entertainment, it's a civic duty, a grim lesson that every citizen, rich or poor, free or slave, is expected to learn. The arena or the public forum becomes a classroom, and the condemned are the unwilling teachers. They're suffering the curriculum. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman public genuinely enjoyed these spectacles, versus attending out of social obligation or a morbid curiosity. While ancient sources describe enthusiastic crowds, modern scholars question the degree of true pleasure derived from such brutality, suggesting a more complex mix of emotions including fear, awe, and social conformity. You see, the primary purpose of these public executions was deterrence. The Romans believed that by making the punishment as public, as agonizing, and as humiliating as possible, they could deter others from committing similar crimes. The spectacle of a man being torn apart by beasts, or slowly dying on a cross, was meant to be burned into the collective memory of the populace, a constant, visceral reminder of the consequences of defying Roman law. It's like getting a really, really intense warning label on a product, but the warning label is a living, screaming person. The long-term impact on Roman legal and ethical thought was also profound. The emphasis on public, brutal punishment reinforced a legal system that prioritized deterrence and state authority over individual rights or rehabilitation. The concept of justice became inextricably linked with the spectacle of suffering, shaping the very moral compass of Roman society. You observe the crowd, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, excitement, and perhaps a subtle undercurrent of fear. They cheer, they jeer, they bet on the outcome. But beneath the surface, the message is sinking in. This could be me. The sheer terror of the condemned, their desperate pleas, their agonizing struggles all served as a powerful, unforgettable lesson. The Romans understood that fear was a potent tool for maintaining order, and they wielded it with brutal efficiency. You realize that the legacy of Roman public executions was not just about the moment of death, but about the lasting fear it instilled, the power it solidified, and the culture it shaped. These were not mere punishments. They were carefully crafted instruments of social control, designed to echo through the generations, ensuring obedience through terror. The arena was not just a place of games. It was a terrifying classroom, and its lessons were written in blood. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the omnipresent shadow of Roman justice that defined the awful truth of their public executions. One common historical fact that highlights the dehumanizing preparation is the practice of verberagio scourging before execution. This brutal flogging, often with whips embedded with bone or metal, was designed to strip the flesh from the victim's back, causing immense pain and blood loss. It was a standard prelude to crucifixion and other severe forms of execution, ensuring the condemned were already in agony before their final ordeal. You've just internalized the chilling, enduring legacy of Rome's public executions. Understanding how fear, state control, and the normalization of violence permeated Roman society. As the omnipresent shadow of Roman justice fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, You now turn your gaze from the broad societal impact to a more insidious, yet equally powerful consequence: the profound moral degradation that these spectacles inflicted upon the very fabric of Roman society. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of how public death, as entertainment, eroded the ethical compass of a civilization, fostering a chilling indifference to human suffering. Consider the concept of exemplum, the idea of setting an example. Every execution was an exemplum, a living, dying lesson. It wasn't enough for a criminal to simply die. Their death had to be meaningful, instructive, and terrifying. The method of execution was often chosen to fit the crime, or the status of the criminal, further enhancing its didactic purpose. A slave who rebelled might be crucified, a clear message to others contemplating revolt. A Roman citizen who committed treason might be beheaded, a swifter, less humiliating death, but still a public display of justice. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen, not just witnessing an execution, but participating in the culture that celebrated it. You are surrounded by people who cheer for the disembowelment of a criminal, who find amusement in the terror of a man facing a lion, who casually discuss the quality of a death. This isn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it's a deeply ingrained cultural acceptance of extreme cruelty, a desensitization that permeates every level of society. It's like living in a world where everyone thinks watching someone get eaten by a bear is a fun family outing, and you're considered weird if you don't enjoy it. You might see a condemned man, accused of treason, dragged through the streets, his crime publicly proclaimed. He is then led to the execution site, perhaps the Gemonian stairs, where traitors were thrown to their deaths, their bodies left to rot. The public witnessing of his downfall, the stripping away of his dignity, was as much a part of the punishment as the death itself. It served to delegitimize him, to erase his standing, and to reinforce the absolute authority of the state. You see, the constant exposure to brutal public death, from childhood onwards, had a profound effect on the Roman psyche. What might initially have been shocking became normalized. The screams of the condemned, the sight of blood and torn flesh, the agony of a slow death, these became commonplace, part of the expected entertainment. This desensitization meant that the capacity for empathy, for recognizing the shared humanity of the condemned, gradually withered away. Think about the reinforcement of state power. The emperor, the magistrates, the legions, they were the instruments of Roman law, and these executions were their most visceral demonstration of authority. By orchestrating these spectacles, the state projected an image of unchallengeable might, of a system that would tolerate no dissent, no defiance. The power of Rome was not just abstract, it was embodied in the blood and screams of the condemned. You might observe a group of children playing in the streets, mimicking the gladiatorial games, or even reenacting executions, their innocent games reflecting the brutal realities they witness in the arena. Their laughter, as they pretend to be lions tearing apart their playmates, is chillingly innocent, a testament to how deeply the culture of violence has permeated their young minds. This early exposure to extreme cruelty shaped their moral development, teaching them that human suffering, under certain circumstances, was not only acceptable but enjoyable. You hear the roar of the crowd, not just for the spectacle, but for the power that orchestrates it. When the emperor or a magistrate gives the thumbs down signal, or orders the execution to proceed, they are literally holding the power of life and death in their hands. This display of ultimate authority was crucial for maintaining control over a vast and diverse empire, constantly reminding its citizens and subjects of who held the reins of power. It's like a really intense performance review, where if you don't get a good rating, you get eaten by a lion. Consider the erosion of the concept of human dignity. For the Romans, the condemned were often infames individuals stripped of their legal rights and social standing, effectively dehumanized. Their public executions were designed to emphasize this loss of dignity, to reduce them to mere objects of spectacle and warning. This systematic dehumanization of certain groups, slaves, criminals, rebels, and later Christians, made it easier for the Roman public to view their suffering with detachment, or even pleasure, or even... The executions also served as a means of social cohesion, albeit a grim one. By uniting the populace in a shared experience of fear and entertainment, the state could foster a sense of collective identity and loyalty. The us versus them mentality was reinforced us. the law-abiding citizens who uphold Roman order, and them, the criminals, the rebels, the enemies of the state, who justly suffer for their transgressions. You might see a condemned individual stripped naked, his body already broken by torture, being mocked and jeered by the crowd. There is no pity, no compassion, only a collective sense of righteous indignation or morbid amusement. The condemned is no longer seen as a person, but as a symbol of defiance, a spectacle of justice, or simply a disposable body for public entertainment. The very concept of inherent human worth was undermined by these displays. You might observe the diverse crowd in the amphitheater, senators in their fine togas, plebeians in their simple tunics, even slaves. They are all united by the spectacle, their shared reactions creating a temporary bond. This collective experience, however brutal, served to reinforce their shared Roman identity and their allegiance to the state that provided such entertainment. Think about the impact on the legal system itself. When punishment became a form of entertainment, the emphasis shifted from justice and rehabilitation to spectacle and deterrence through terror. The goal was not necessarily to reform the criminal, but to make an example of them, to instill fear in others. This led to increasingly elaborate and cruel forms of execution. As the demand for more thrilling and terrifying spectacles grew, one common historical fact that highlights the deterrent purpose of public executions is the regular crucifixion of rebels and runaway slaves along major roads. The sight of rotting bodies on crosses served as a grim, constant warning to anyone contemplating defiance or escape, making the consequences of their actions impossible to ignore. The Appian Way, for example, was famously lined with crucified Spartacus rebels. You hear the shouts of the crowd in the amphitheater, demanding more blood, more suffering. The magistrates, eager to maintain their popularity, respond by devising new and more gruesome ways to dispatch the condemned. The pursuit of justice becomes a race to the bottom, a descent into ever greater cruelty, driven by the insatiable appetite of the masses. It's like a really bad TV show that keeps adding more explosions and gratuitous violence just to keep the ratings up. A lesser-known detail about the psychological manipulation behind these executions involves the use of symbolic deaths. Sometimes, the condemned were forced to reenact mythological scenes where a character met a gruesome end, often at the hands of wild animals. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a deliberate attempt to link the criminal's fate to a narrative of divine justice or cosmic order, making their punishment seem not just legal, but almost fated. It's like being forced to star in a play where your character dies horribly, and then you actually die horribly. The casual acceptance of death as entertainment also fostered a culture of callousness towards violence in general. If human life could be so casually extinguished for public amusement, then what value did it truly hold? This attitude permeated Roman society, contributing to the brutality of their warfare, the harshness of their slave system, and the general indifference to suffering that characterized many aspects of their daily lives. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which these public executions truly deterred crime in the long run, or if their primary function was more about maintaining social control through fear and reinforcing the power of the state. While the Romans certainly intended them as deterrents, the actual impact on crime rates is difficult to measure, leading to ongoing scholarly discussion about their effectiveness. You might observe a Roman soldier, after a brutal campaign, recounting tales of torture and slaughter with a detached, almost casual tone. His sensibilities hardened by years of witnessing violence. The lines between military necessity, legal punishment, and gratuitous cruelty blurred, creating a society that was, by modern standards, profoundly brutalized. The executions also served to define the boundaries of Roman society. Who was subject to these brutal forms of death? Typically, slaves, non-Roman citizens, and those who committed crimes against the state, such as treason or rebellion. Roman citizens, especially those of higher status, usually faced less humiliating forms of execution, like beheading, or were given the option of suicide. This distinction reinforced the hierarchy of Roman society and the privileges of citizenship. One common historical fact that illustrates this moral degradation is the Roman practice of allowing spectators to participate in the executions. For example, by throwing stones or jeering at the condemned. This direct involvement further blurred the lines between observer and participant, making the audience complicit in the cruelty and deepening their desensitization to human suffering. You see the stark contrast: a Roman citizen, condemned to a swift, dignified beheading, perhaps in a private courtyard, compared to a slave, condemned to damnatio ad bestias in the public arena. The method of death itself was a powerful statement about one's place in the Roman social order, a final, brutal reminder of status. A lesser-known detail about the erosion of empathy involves the use of animal hunts venaciones as part of the games. While not always involving human victims, these spectacles involved the brutal slaughter of exotic animals, often in vast numbers, for public amusement. This constant exposure to the violent killing of animals, purely for entertainment, further desensitized the Roman public to bloodshed and suffering, making the transition to human executions less jarring. It's like going to a zoo where the main attraction is watching the zookeepers fight the animals to the death. The sheer scale of these events, the resources poured into them, the wild animals imported from distant lands, the elaborate arena setups, the vast crowds all underscored the immense power and wealth of the Roman state. These were not cheap spectacles, they were massive investments in social control, a testament to how seriously the Romans took the business of instilling fear and maintaining authority. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman public truly enjoyed the suffering of the condemned, versus viewing it as a necessary, if unpleasant, act of justice. While ancient sources describe enthusiastic crowds, modern scholars suggest that a complex mix of emotions, including fear, awe, and a sense of civic duty, might have been at play rather than pure sadistic pleasure. You realize that Roman public executions were not just about punishment. They were a meticulously crafted, multi-layered tool of governance. They were designed to terrify, to deter, to reinforce power, and to unite the populace in a shared understanding of Roman might. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a stage for death, where human suffering was transformed into a chilling lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd and the screams of the condemned that define the awful truth of Roman public executions. And their ultimate purpose of fear and control, the moral degradation also manifested in the emperor's role. As the chief orchestrator of these spectacles, the emperor himself became implicated in the cruelty. While some emperors might have found the executions distasteful, others, like Nero or Commodus, reveled in the bloodshed, using it as a means to project their power and indulge their own sadistic tendencies. The imperial office, meant to embody justice and order, became stained by the very brutality it sanctioned. You've just understood the chilling purpose behind Roman public executions: to instill fear and reinforce the absolute power of the state. As the imagined roar of the crowd fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the underlying motives to the horrifying methods themselves. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the brutal variety of Roman capital punishment, from the infamous crucifixion to being torn apart by beasts. The ways the Romans dispatched the condemned were as diverse as they were terrifying. You see the emperor giving the thumbs down signal in the Colosseum, condemning a man to death with a casual flick of his wrist. His power is absolute, his judgment final, and his actions are celebrated by the roaring crowd. This constant wielding of life and death, this casual embrace of cruelty, would have had a profound impact on the emperor's own moral compass, potentially leading to a chilling detachment from human suffering. Imagine yourself standing in the bustling Roman Forum, not for a political speech, but for a public execution. The air is thick with anticipation, a morbid excitement that draws people from all walks of life. You might expect a simple, quick death, but the Romans believed that the method of execution itself was a crucial part of the punishment, a deliberate act of suffering designed to maximize its impact on both the condemned and the spectators. The long-term consequences of this moral degradation were profound. A society that normalized extreme violence, that celebrated human suffering as entertainment, risked losing its own sense of humanity. While Rome achieved unparalleled greatness in many fields, its embrace of public executions stands as a grim testament to the darker side of its cultural and ethical development. You see, the Romans were masters of cruelty, and their methods of execution reflected this grim creativity. While some forms were relatively swift, many were designed for prolonged agony, public humiliation and a terrifying spectacle. The choice of method often depended on the crime, the status of the condemned, and the message the state wished to send. You realize that the awful truth of Roman public executions extends far beyond the arena floor. It is a truth about the erosion of empathy, the normalization of cruelty, and the profound moral degradation that can occur when human suffering becomes a spectacle. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a terrifying classroom, and its lessons were written in blood, shaping a society that, to modern eyes, appears chillingly callous. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the omnipresent shadow of Roman justice and the moral decay it fostered. Consider, first, the most infamous crucifixion. You've heard the name? But to truly grasp its horror, you must imagine it. Reserved primarily for slaves, rebels, and non-Roman citizens, those considered lowest in the social hierarchy or greatest threats to the state, crucifixion was a slow, agonizing death. The condemned would be nailed or tied to a large wooden cross, often naked, exposed to the elements. You have just felt the profound moral corruption that Roman public executions wrought. The way human suffering became a spectacle and empathy was eroded. As the shadow of Roman justice and the sound of your fan return, you now turn your gaze from the moral impact to another disturbing aspect, the corruption of those in power themselves. Tonight, we will delve into the terrible truth of how public executions not only corrupted society, but also corrupted those in power, making them cruel and indifferent to human suffering. You might observe a condemned man, his body already bruised and battered from scourging, being forced to carry his own crossbeam through the streets, enduring the jeers and insults of the crowd. He is then hoisted onto the cross, his limbs stretched, his body sagging. Death would come slowly, often over hours or even days, from exhaustion, dehydration, blood loss, and asphyxiation as the body struggled to breathe. The sight of rotting bodies on crosses, lining major roads like the Appian Way famously after the Spartacus rebellion, was a constant, grim warning, a terrifying billboard of Roman justice. It's like being forced to stand in a corner for days. But the corner is across, and you're slowly dying. Imagine yourself as a Roman official, perhaps a judge, a consul, or even an emperor. You are the one ordering, the one approving, the one overseeing these deadly spectacles. At first, there may be some hesitation, some discomfort, but as you witness execution after execution, as you see the crowds cheer, and as you feel the absolute power you wield, a subtle change begins to take place within you. Apathy begins to creep in, and then acceptance, even amusement. It's like having to watch a horror movie every day. And eventually, you start to find it funny. Think about damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This was a particularly popular form of execution in the amphitheaters, designed for maximum spectacle and brutality. The condemned, often Christians, criminals, or prisoners of war, would be thrown, often unarmed and naked, into the arena with hungry wild animals. Lions, tigers, bears, leopards, and even wild bulls were imported from across the empire for this purpose. You see, constantly ordering and witnessing brutal deaths can harden even the most resilient of souls. For Roman officials, executions were more than just a duty. They were part of the job, a necessary tool to maintain order. But as this tool became increasingly brutal and entertaining, the line between justice and cruelty became blurred. Absolute power to decide life and death, reinforced by public adulation, can lead to arrogance and a terrifying indifference to human suffering. You might see a group of condemned individuals pushed into the sandy arena floor. The gates open, and a roar echoes through the Colosseum as a pack of starved lions rushes out. The condemned scatter, screaming. But there is no escape. The animals, sometimes goaded by handlers, tear at their flesh, ripping them apart limb by limb. The crowd, meanwhile, roars its approval, reveling in the visceral display of death. This wasn't a quick mauling, it was often a drawn-out, bloody spectacle, a terrifying hunt played out for public amusement. You might watch a magistrate, initially stern, gradually develop a smirk as a lion tears apart a victim. He no longer sees a suffering human being, he sees a successful spectacle, a satisfied crowd, and an assertion of his power. Cruelty becomes second nature, a means to an end, and ultimately a source of entertainment. Then there was burning alive crematio, or vivicumburium. This method was often reserved for crimes considered particularly heinous, such as arson, sacrilege, or certain forms of treason. The condemned would be tied to a stake, often surrounded by flammable materials, and then set alight. The agony would be prolonged, the screams echoing through the public square as the body slowly consumed by flames. You might observe the condemned, tied tightly, their eyes wide with terror as the torch approaches. The smell of smoke and burning flesh fills the air, a horrifying sensory experience for both the victim and the spectators. The fire, a symbol of purification and destruction, was seen as a fitting end for those who had committed crimes against the gods or the state. It's like a really bad barbecue, but you're the main course, and no one brought marshmallows. Consider being thrown from a height directioné a saxo for certain traitors or those who committed serious crimes against the state. The punishment was to be hurled from the Tarpeian Rock, a steep cliff overlooking the Roman Forum. This was a swift but incredibly public and humiliating death, signifying the ultimate rejection by Roman society. You see the emperor thumbs down in the Colosseum, condemning a man to death with a casual wave of his hand. His power was absolute, his judgment final, and his actions cheered by the crowd. This constant wielding of the power of life and death, this indifferent acceptance of cruelty, would have had a profound effect on the emperor's own moral compass, potentially leading to a terrifying detachment from human suffering. He no longer saw individuals, he saw instruments to express his power. This moral decay was also reflected in the way condemned prisoners were treated by officials. Instead of being seen as individuals who deserved a fair trial, they were often seen as material for the games, bodies that could be used to entertain the crowds. This led to a lack of respect for their lives, and a willingness to subject them to extreme suffering. You see the condemned, bound and blindfolded, led to the edge of the precipice. The crowd below watches in silence, their eyes fixed on the tiny figure. A push, a scream, and then a sickening thud as the body hits the rocks below. The body would often be left there for a time, exposed to the elements and scavengers, a grim warning to all who passed by. You can observe how jailers and guards, who were accustomed to brutally treating prisoners, viewed them as nothing more than animals. They were hardened by the suffering they witnessed on a daily basis, and their empathy was eroded. Those who were supposed to uphold justice became the ones who carried out cruelty. For Roman citizens of higher status, execution by beheading decollatio was considered a more honorable and less humiliating death. It was generally swift and inflicted with a sword or axe, avoiding the prolonged agony and public degradation of crucifixion or damnatio ad bestias. This distinction reinforced the hierarchy of Roman society, even in death. A common historical fact that illustrates the corruption of those in power is that Roman emperors sometimes participated in the games themselves, not only as organizers but also as participants. Commodus, for example, was famous for fighting gladiators and wild animals in the arena. While this may have been an attempt to demonstrate strength and bravery, it also shows the degradation of the imperial office and the acceptance of violence as a form of personal entertainment. You might observe a condemned citizen, perhaps a senator accused of treason, led to a private courtyard or a less public space. He kneels, his head held high, and with a single, swift stroke, his life is ended. While still a brutal act, it lacked the theatrical cruelty inflicted upon slaves and non-citizens, a final testament to the privileges of Roman citizenship. A lesser-known detail of moral degradation involves the use of condemned prisoners in public spectacles that did not entail immediate death, but still involved humiliation and suffering. For example, they might be forced to perform heavy labor in the arena, or forced to participate in mock performances before their execution. This prolonged the suffering and added to the humiliation, showing the willingness of officials to exploit human pain for entertainment purposes. It was like being forced to do an extremely bad job before being fired, just so people could laugh at you. One common historical fact that highlights the variety of Roman executions is the practice of pona culae, the punishment of the sack reserved for parricides, those who murdered their parents. The condemned would be sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, and then thrown into water to drown. This incredibly specific and gruesome method underscored the abhorrence with which the Romans viewed such a heinous crime. And here is an open academic debate. Historians still debate whether the brutality of some emperors, such as Caligula or Nero, was the result of moral decay brought on by absolute power in public executions, or whether they had pre-existing psychological tendencies. The complex relationship between power, violence, and human psychology remains a complex area of academic discussion. A lesser-known detail about Roman executions involves the use of living torches. During Nero's persecution of Christians, he reportedly had them covered in pitch and set alight to serve as human torches to illuminate his gardens at night. While the historical accuracy of the full extent of this practice is debated, it speaks to the depths of cruelty to which Roman emperors could descend. It's like having a garden party, and your lighting fixtures are screaming people. The moral decay also extended to lower-level officials who carried out executions and ran the arenas. Soldiers, jailers, and executioners, who were constantly exposed to violence and suffering, could become callous and indifferent. For them, human suffering became normal, part of the daily grind. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the precise frequency and scale of certain types of executions, particularly damnatio ad bestias. While ancient sources describe them vividly, the exact numbers of condemned individuals and the regularity of these spectacles across the vast empire remain subjects of scholarly discussion, making it difficult to quantify the true scale of Roman cruelty. You see a soldier, after participating in a brutal execution, return home and have dinner with his family, seemingly unaffected by what he has just witnessed. This detachment, this inability to feel empathy, is a terrifying legacy of the system. The lack of significant opposition or criticism from the Roman elite also suggests a level of moral depravity. While there may have been private whispers of disgust, few dared to openly challenge public executions. This silence suggests widespread acceptance of the system, and the willingness of those in power to maintain it, regardless of the moral cost. Beyond these specific methods, the Romans also employed various forms of torture leading up to execution, or as part of the execution itself. Scourging, branding, and mutilation were common, designed to inflict pain, extract confessions, and further humiliate the condemned before their final demise. The suffering was not just about the moment of death, it was about the journey to it. You realize that the terrible truth about Roman public executions lies not just in the brutality of the methods or the suffering of the victims, it lies in the profound moral depravity it inflicted on those in power themselves, turning them into perpetrators of cruelty, indifferent to human suffering, and ultimately that people corrupted by the very power they wielded. The arena was not just a place of entertainment, it was a crucible where humanity was burned, and the leaders of Roman society were horribly transformed by its flames. Your fanning now sounds like a sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the looming shadow of Roman justice and the moral decay it wrought. You've just recognized the profound moral degradation that public executions inflicted, not just on society, but on the very individuals wielding power, turning them into callous enforcers of cruelty. As the chilling shadow of Roman justice fades and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the moral decay to the grim, often overlooked, aftermath of these spectacles. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of what happened after the executions, the final indignities, the disposal of the bodies, and the lingering presence of death that permeated Roman public spaces. You realize that Roman public executions were not just about punishment. They were a meticulously crafted, multi-layered tool of governance. They were designed to terrify, to deter, to reinforce power, and to unite the populace in a shared understanding of Roman might. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a stage for death, where human suffering was transformed into a chilling lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd and the screams of the condemned that define the awful truth of Roman public executions. And their ultimate purpose of fear and control? Imagine yourself in the Colosseum, or a public forum, just after the crowd has dispersed, their bloodlust sated, their cheers echoing in the vast, empty space. The sun begins to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the sandy arena floor, but the stage is not empty. Scattered across the ground are the gruesome remnants of the day's performance pools of blood, discarded weapons, and, most horrifyingly, the mangled bodies of the condemned. This is the grim cleanup, a chilling coda to the day's brutal entertainment. And it reveals another layer of Rome's casual cruelty. You've just explored the horrifying variety of Roman capital punishment, understanding that their methods were designed for maximum suffering and spectacle. As the imagined screams fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the brutal methods to the unfortunate souls who faced them. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the victims of Rome's public executions, a diverse and often desperate group, ranging from the lowest slaves to rebellious emperors, proving that no one was truly safe from the state's merciless hand. You see, for many of the condemned, particularly slaves, criminals, and non-Roman citizens, there was no dignified removal, no respectful burial. Their bodies were often treated as refuse, mere objects to be disposed of. The concept of ius sepulchri, the right of burial, was a privilege reserved primarily for Roman citizens and those of higher status. For the infames, the utterly dishonored, even death offered no peace or respect. Imagine yourself standing in the bustling Roman forum, not as a spectator, but as one of the condemned, stripped of your dignity, awaiting your fate. The air is thick with the jeers of the crowd, the metallic scent of fear, and the chilling realization that your life is about to end in a public, agonizing display. You are just one of countless individuals who, for various reasons, found themselves on the wrong side of Roman justice, destined to become an exemplum, a terrifying example for all to witness. You might observe a team of Roman laborers, often slaves themselves, moving grimly across the arena floor, dragging the bodies of the executed. They are not handled with care, they are unceremoniously hooked with grappling irons, or simply dragged by ropes, leaving trails of blood in the sand. The bodies might be piled onto carts, destined for a common pit, or more often, for the Tiber River. This final indignity, the denial of proper funerary rites, was a deliberate act of further punishment, designed to ensure that the condemned found no rest, even in the afterlife. It's like throwing away your trash, but your trash is a human being, and you're doing it in front of everyone. You see, the victims of Roman public executions came from almost every stratum of society, though some groups were far more likely to face the most brutal forms of death. At the very bottom were the slaves. Rome was a slave society, and the lives of slaves were considered cheap, their bodies mere property. A runaway slave, a rebellious slave, or one who committed a serious crime against their master or the state, could expect the most agonizing and humiliating deaths, often crucifixion or damnatio ad bestias. Consider the disposal of bodies into the Tiber River. For those condemned to this fate, their bodies would be unceremoniously dumped into the river, left to float downstream. A grim spectacle for anyone living along its banks. This was not just a convenient way to get rid of corpses, it was a powerful symbolic act. The Tiber was Rome's lifeblood, a sacred river. To cast the bodies of the condemned into it was to ritually pollute them, to deny them any connection to the sacred earth of Rome, and to condemn their souls to wander endlessly, unable to find peace. You might observe a slave, his body already scarred from beatings, dragged to the execution site, his desperate pleas ignored by the callous crowd. He is a stark reminder to all other slaves of the consequences of disobedience, a visceral lesson in submission. His suffering is not just punishment, it is a deliberate act of terror, designed to keep millions of other enslaved individuals in line. It's like being a toy that breaks, and then your owner publicly smashes you to warn all the other toys not to break. You might see a bloated corpse floating by the riverbanks, a chilling reminder of the state's power and its merciless justice. The sight would be common enough to be almost unremarkable, another grim part of the Roman landscape. This casual exposure to death and desecration further contributed to the desensitization of the populace. Consider the rebels and enemies of the state. Rome, a vast empire built on conquest, constantly faced internal rebellions and external threats. Those who dared to challenge Roman authority, whether a provincial uprising, a gladiatorial revolt like Spartacus's, or a foreign enemy captured in war, were often subjected to the most public and agonizing deaths. Their executions were not just about eliminating a threat, they were about crushing the spirit of resistance. sending an unmistakable message that defiance was futile and would be met with overwhelming, brutal force. Think about the bodies left on display, and for those condemned to crucifixion, their bodies were often left on the crosses for days, weeks, or even months, slowly decaying under the sun, becoming food for scavengers. These grim billboards of justice were placed along major roads leading into and out of cities, ensuring that anyone traveling would witness the consequences of defying Rome. You might see a captured barbarian chieftain, once a proud warrior, now paraded through the streets of Rome in a triumphal procession. His eventual execution a foregone conclusion. He will be led to the Mamertine prison, and then perhaps strangled, or thrown from the Tarpeian Rock. His death a final act in Rome's demonstration of dominance. His suffering is a symbol of Rome's victory, a testament to the might of the legions. You hear the buzzing of flies, the distant caw of ravens, as you pass by a line of crosses, their occupants slowly rotting. The stench would be unbearable, the sight horrifying. Yet, Romans would pass by these scenes daily, their sensibilities hardened by constant exposure. This prolonged display of suffering and death was a powerful, constant deterrent, a visceral reminder that Rome's justice was absolute and its punishments eternal. It's like a really, really long-running art installation, but it's made of dead people. Think about the Christians. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, its adherents often refused to participate in the imperial cult, to worship the emperor as a god, or to offer sacrifices to the traditional Roman deities. This refusal was seen as an act of treason, a direct challenge to Roman authority and social order. Consequently, Christians became frequent targets of public execution, particularly damnatio ad bestias, or burning alive. The very air in public spaces, particularly around execution sites, would have carried the lingering scent of death, decay, and blood. Even after the bodies were removed, the stains on the stone, the lingering odors, and the collective memory of the screams would have remained, imbuing these places with a chilling aura. The public spaces of Rome, meant for commerce, politics, and entertainment, were also perpetually haunted by the specter of death. You might observe a group of Christians, their faces calm despite their terror, refusing to recant their faith even as the wild animals are unleashed. Their martyrdom, while horrifying to witness, was a powerful testament to their beliefs, and, ironically, often served to strengthen the resolve of other Christians. The Romans intended to extinguish their faith through terror, but often they inadvertently created martyrs whose deaths inspired others. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, and then being surprised when it gets bigger. You might walk through the Forum, where political speeches were given and laws were passed, but you know that this very ground has witnessed countless executions, that the stones beneath your feet have been stained with blood. The grandeur of Rome is always juxtaposed with its brutal reality, a constant reminder of the violence that underpinned its power. Even Roman citizens, particularly those of lower status humiliores, or those who committed serious crimes against the state like treason maestas, could face public execution. While citizens generally avoided the most humiliating forms of death like crucifixion, they could still be beheaded, or in some extreme cases, subjected to more gruesome fates. The concept of citizenship offered some protection, but it was not an absolute shield against the state's wrath. One common historical fact that highlights the post-execution indignity is that the bodies of executed criminals were often thrown into the fossa, communist common pits outside the city walls, unceremoniously dumped alongside the bodies of the poor and unidentified. This further emphasized their lack of status and their complete rejection by society. You might see a Roman citizen, perhaps a disgraced senator accused of plotting against the emperor, led to a public square. His execution by beheading, though swifter than other methods, is still a stark reminder that even those with status could fall. His death sends a clear message to the elite: no one is above the law, and no one is safe from the emperor's justice. A lesser-known detail about the aftermath involves the spoliation of the bodies. Sometimes, the clothes or personal effects of the condemned, if they had any, might be taken by the executioners or even by members of the crowd. This final act of stripping away their possessions further dehumanized the victims and underscored their complete powerlessness in death. It's like getting robbed after you've already been, well, you know. And then there were the emperors themselves. As we've explored, the Roman throne was a precarious perch. and many emperors met violent ends at the hands of their own Praetorian Guard, ambitious generals, or treacherous family members. While these assassinations were often carried out in private, some emperors who were deposed or defeated in civil wars faced public humiliation and execution, or were forced to commit suicide in public. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman public truly felt a sense of closure or satisfaction after these executions, or if the lingering presence of death and the brutal disposal of bodies created a more complex emotional landscape, perhaps fostering a subtle unease or even a subconscious fear, despite the outward displays of enjoyment. Think of the emperor. As the supreme organizer of the gladiatorial games, he was ultimately responsible for these deadly spectacles. While some emperors may have found them repugnant, others, like Nero or Commodus, reveled in bloodshed, using it as a means to exert power and satisfy their own sadistic tendencies. The imperial office, meant to embody justice and order, was tainted by the very brutality it permitted. The families of the condemned also suffered a profound and lasting legacy of shame and dishonor. For a Roman, family honor was paramount. The public execution and desecration of a family member's body brought immense disgrace, tainting the entire lineage. They would be unable to provide a proper burial, unable to perform the necessary rites for the soul's passage, leaving them in a state of perpetual mourning and social stigma. You might observe a former emperor, once revered as a living god, now stripped of his purple, dragged through the streets, his face bruised and battered, before being publicly strangled or beheaded. His downfall is a chilling spectacle, a dramatic demonstration of the fleeting nature of power and the brutal realities of Roman politics. His public death serves as a warning to both aspiring usurpers and the populace. The wheel of fortune turns, and even the highest can fall. You see a family discreetly trying to retrieve the body of their loved one from the execution site, risking punishment themselves. Their grief is compounded by the public humiliation and the inability to provide a respectful farewell. The suffering of the condemned extended far beyond their own death, impacting their entire family for generations. One common historical fact that highlights the diverse victims of Roman executions is the widespread use of crucifixion for the rebels of Spartacus's slave revolt in 71 BC. After their defeat, an estimated 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome, serving as a horrifying, miles-long warning to any who dared to challenge Roman authority. Even the animals used in damnatio ad bestias faced a grim fate. While they were instruments of imperial justice, they were also often killed in the arena after the executions, or died from injuries sustained during the spectacles. Their lives, like those of the condemned, were expendable for the sake of Roman entertainment and power. A lesser-known detail about the victims involves the practice of damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, which often accompanied the execution of high-profile individuals, especially emperors or senators accused of treason. Not only were they publicly executed, but their names were chiseled from monuments, their statues pulled down, and their images defaced, an attempt to erase their very existence from history and public consciousness. It's like being publicly executed, and then someone immediately goes around deleting all your social media accounts and photos. You realize that the awful truth of Roman public executions extends far beyond the moment of death. It is a truth about the deliberate desecration of bodies, the denial of dignity, and the pervasive presence of death in public spaces. These were not just punishments, they were carefully orchestrated acts of terror, designed to leave a lasting mark on the living, ensuring obedience through the chilling spectacle of death and its grim aftermath. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a charnel house, and its lessons were etched in blood and bone, forever haunting the very fabric of Roman society. As the horrifying images of the aftermath of Roman executions finally fade, and the sound of your fan fills the silence of the room, you take a deep, relieved breath. Your journey through the gruesome truth of Roman public executions has shown you a world far more brutal, cold, and horrifying than you ever imagined. You now understand that the arena, while a symbol of entertainment, was also a place of deadly spectacle, where human suffering was turned into a grisly lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. You've just been confronted with the grim aftermath of Roman public executions, understanding the final indignities and the pervasive presence of death in their public spaces. As the chilling images of desecrated bodies fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now prepare for the ultimate, often overlooked, layer of this awful truth, the profound, lasting psychological scars left on both the spectators and the society that normalized such brutality. Tonight, we delve into how the constant spectacle of public death warped the Roman psyche, creating a chilling indifference to suffering and a society profoundly shaped by its own cruelty. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the precise demographics of those condemned to damnatio ad bestias. While ancient sources often focus on Christians, some scholars argue that the vast majority of victims were common criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war, with Christians becoming a more prominent target during specific periods of persecution. The exact proportion and identity of those thrown to the beasts remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen, not just a witness to a single execution, but a lifelong attendee of these spectacles. From your earliest childhood, you've seen men torn apart by beasts, bodies left to rot on crosses, and criminals burned alive. This wasn't a rare occurrence, it was a regular, anticipated part of public life. What does this constant exposure to extreme violence do to a society? It desensitizes, it brutalizes, and it creates a chilling acceptance of cruelty as a normal, even entertaining, part of existence. The condemned often faced torture before their execution, designed to extract confessions, reveal co-conspirators, or simply to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Scourging, branding, and various forms of physical abuse were common, ensuring that the victim was already broken, both physically and mentally, before their final public agony. You see, the human mind is remarkably adaptable. What is initially shocking can, with repeated exposure, become mundane. The screams of the condemned, the sight of blood and gore, the agony of a slow death, these visceral experiences over time would have lost their power to truly shock or horrify many Romans. They became background noise, part of the expected entertainment, no more disturbing than a particularly rough chariot race. It's like watching too many violent movies. Eventually, the gore just doesn't faze you anymore. You see the condemned, their bodies bruised and bleeding, their spirits shattered, as they are led to the execution site. Their suffering is not just about the moment of death, it is about the journey to it, a prolonged ordeal designed to break them utterly before the final spectacle. You might observe a group of Roman citizens, casually discussing the performance of a condemned man, critiquing his bravery or lack thereof, much as they would a gladiator. Their conversations are devoid of empathy, their faces betraying no sign of distress. This chilling detachment, this ability to view extreme human suffering as a form of amusement, is a profound testament to the moral degradation that permeated Roman society. Even the bodies of the executed were often denied proper burial. They might be left to rot on the cross, thrown into the Tiber River, or exposed to scavengers. This was a final act of dehumanization, a denial of dignity even in death, designed to send a clear message that those who defied Rome would find no peace, even in the afterlife. Their very remains were used as a deterrent, a grim monument to Roman justice. Consider the impact on the concept of justice. When punishment became a form of entertainment, the focus shifted away from rehabilitation or even simple retribution. The goal was to maximize the spectacle, to create a thrilling display for the masses. This led to an escalation of cruelty, as magistrates and emperors sought to outdo each other in devising more gruesome and inventive forms of death. The pursuit of justice became a race to the bottom, a descent into ever greater barbarity. You realize that the victims of Roman public executions were not just anonymous figures. They were individuals from all walks of life, caught in the merciless grip of Roman power. Their suffering was deliberate, their deaths a spectacle, all designed to instill fear, reinforce authority, and maintain control over a vast and often volatile empire. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a stage for death, where human suffering was transformed into a chilling lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. The hum of your fan now seems like a gentle sigh of relief, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd and the screams of the condemned that defined the awful truth of Roman public executions. and the tragic fates of those who faced them. You hear the roar of the crowd, demanding more blood, more suffering, their insatiable appetite driving the state to ever greater extremes. The magistrates, eager to maintain their popularity and assert their power, respond by devising new methods of torture and execution. The very notion of what constituted justice was warped, becoming synonymous with public agony and humiliation. It's like a chef constantly trying to make their dishes spicier and spicier until they're just serving pure chili paste, and everyone pretends to enjoy it. You've just confronted the diverse and tragic fates of those condemned to Rome's public executions, realizing that no one, from the lowliest slave to the highest emperor, was truly safe. As the imagined screams of the arena fade and the comforting hum of your fan returns, you now turn your gaze from the final spectacle to the horrifying prelude. Tonight, we delve into the awful truth of the condemned's final hours, the brutal preparations, the psychological torment, and the deliberate stripping away of dignity that made the journey to death itself a prolonged and terrifying ordeal. Think about the psychological toll on those who were forced to participate in these spectacles, not as victims, but as enforcers. The executioners, the guards, the arena workers. These individuals were constantly immersed in the grim business of death. What does it do to a person to regularly inflict such suffering, to witness such horror day in and day out? It brutalizes, it hardens, and it can lead to a profound emotional detachment. Imagine yourself as one of the condemned, perhaps a Christian refusing to recant, or a slave caught in a failed rebellion. You are not immediately led to the arena. Instead, you find yourself in the grim confines of a Roman prison, often a dark, damp, and unsanitary place. The air is thick with the stench of human waste, fear, and despair. Your body is already weakened by days or weeks of meager rations and harsh conditions, but the physical suffering is just the beginning. The psychological torment begins long before the final act. You might observe an executioner, his face impassive, performing his gruesome task with practiced efficiency, his hands stained with blood. He is no longer affected by the screams, the pleas, or the terror of his victims. He is a cog in the machine of Roman justice, his humanity slowly eroded by the demands of his profession. This kind of work, repeated over a lifetime, would undoubtedly lead to severe psychological trauma, even if it was normalized by society. You see, the Romans understood that terror was most effective when prolonged. The condemned were often held for days, weeks, or even months, knowing their fate was sealed, but uncertain of the exact time or method of their death. This period of agonizing anticipation, of waiting in the shadow of the executioner, was a deliberate form of psychological torture designed to break the spirit before the body. It's like waiting for a really important exam, but you know you're going to fail, and the exam is actually just a very painful public performance of your failure. The long-term consequences for Roman society were profound. A civilization that celebrated cruelty and normalized public death risked losing its own sense of humanity. While Rome achieved unparalleled greatness in many fields: law, engineering, military organization, its embrace of public executions stands as a grim testament to the darker, more disturbing side of its cultural and ethical development. The seeds of its own moral decay were sown in the sands of the arena. You might observe a condemned man, huddled in his cell, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. He listens to the distant sounds of the city, the shouts of the guards, the cries of other prisoners, each sound a reminder of his impending doom. He tries to sleep, but nightmares plague him. Visions of roaring beasts or the agonizing pain of the cross. The uncertainty, the waiting, is a torment almost worse than the physical pain to come. You see the Roman Empire vast and powerful, yet riddled with internal contradictions. A society that could produce great philosophers, poets, and architects could also revel in the most barbaric forms of public torture. This dichotomy, this chilling juxtaposition of high culture and extreme brutality, is one of the most perplexing aspects of Roman history. It challenges our modern understanding of progress and civilization, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that greatness does not always equate to goodness. Consider the interrogation and torture that often preceded execution. For many, particularly those accused of serious crimes against the state, or those whose confessions were desired, torture was a standard part of the judicial process. Scourging, flogging, branding, stretching on the rack, or various forms of mutilation were employed to extract information, punish defiance, or simply to break the will of the condemned. One common historical fact that highlights this psychological impact is the philosophical and moral debates among Roman intellectuals themselves. While many accepted public executions as necessary, figures like Seneca the Younger, a Stoic philosopher, expressed discomfort and even condemnation of the extreme cruelty of the arena games, suggesting that not all Romans were fully desensitized. This indicates an ongoing internal struggle within Roman society regarding these spectacles. You might see a condemned individual brought back to their cell after an interrogation, their body bruised and bleeding, their spirit shattered. Their screams still echo in your mind. This physical abuse was not just about punishment. It was about dehumanization, about reducing the individual to a state of utter helplessness and despair before their public demise. The Romans sought to break their victims entirely, ensuring that their final moments were filled with terror, not defiance. It's like being forced to sign a confession that you hated your boss, but they also break your fingers while you're signing. A lesser-known detail about the psychological impact involves the concept of schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from another's misfortune. While not a Roman term, the phenomenon was undoubtedly present. The public nature of executions, particularly for those deemed infames or enemies of the state, likely provided a perverse sense of satisfaction for many, reinforcing their own sense of righteousness and superiority. It's like watching someone trip and fall, but they're also a terrible person, and they're falling into a pit of lions. Then came the public procession. The Pompa. On the day of the execution, the condemned were often paraded through the streets of Rome, or the relevant city, before being led to the execution site. They might be stripped naked, or clothed in rags, their hands bound, their heads bowed. They were subjected to the jeers, insults, and sometimes even physical assaults from the crowds. This was a deliberate act of public humiliation, a stripping away of their dignity before their final public agony. And here's a point of ongoing academic debate. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman state deliberately used the psychological impact of these executions as a primary tool of social control, beyond simple deterrence. While the fear was certainly a consequence, the degree to which the state consciously manipulated public psychology through these spectacles, fostering specific emotional responses, remains a complex area of scholarly discussion. You see the condemned man, his face bruised, his body trembling, as he is led through the bustling forum, past the very monuments that symbolize Roman justice and order. The crowd, a mixture of citizens and slaves, rich and poor, lines the streets, eager for the spectacle. They shout insults, throw refuse, and revel in his degradation. He is a living lesson, a walking example of what happens when you cross the mighty Roman state. His humiliation a crucial part of his punishment. The legacy of these executions also contributed to the enduring image of Rome as a brutal and ruthless power. Even centuries later, the stories of gladiators, lions, and crucifixions continue to define a certain perception of Roman cruelty. This historical memory, often exaggerated but rooted in truth, serves as a powerful reminder of the depths to which a society can descend when it normalizes public violence. Think about the symbolic clothing and props. Sometimes, the condemned were forced to wear specific garments or symbols that mocked their alleged crime or status. Christians might be dressed in animal skins to symbolize their condemnation to the beasts, or in tunics covered in pitch to be used as living torches. Rebels might be forced to wear crowns of thorns or chains that emphasize their defeat. These visual cues were designed to reinforce the message of the execution and further humiliate the victim. You realize that the awful truth of Roman public executions extends far beyond the moment of death, or even the immediate aftermath. It is a truth about the profound, lasting psychological scars left on both the individuals who witnessed and participated in these events, and on the very fabric of Roman society. It is a truth about the erosion of empathy, the normalization of cruelty, and the chilling indifference to human suffering that can permeate a culture. The arena was not just a place of games, it was a terrifying classroom, and its lessons were etched in blood and bone, forever haunting the very psyche of Rome. As the horrifying images of the aftermath of Roman executions finally fade, and the sound of your fan fills the silence of the room. You take a deep, relieved breath. Your journey through the gruesome truth of Roman public executions has shown you a world far more brutal, cold, and horrifying than you ever imagined. You now understand that the arena, while a symbol of entertainment, was also a place of deadly spectacle, where human suffering was turned into a grisly lesson, and the boundaries of cruelty were constantly pushed to ensure obedience. You might observe a condemned man, dressed in a ridiculous costume, forced to carry a sign detailing his crime, his face a mask of despair. The Romans understood the power of symbolism, and they used it to maximize the impact of the execution, turning the condemned into grotesque caricatures of their former selves. It's like being forced to wear a giant sign that says, "I stole a cookie," while everyone points and laughs. But then you also get eaten by a tiger. The denial of proper burial was also a crucial part of the punishment, particularly for those condemned to crucifixion or thrown from the Tarpeian rock. For the Romans, a proper burial was essential for the soul's passage to the afterlife. To be denied burial, to have one's body left to rot on the cross or be thrown into the Tiber River, was a final act of humiliation, a denial of dignity even in death. It was meant to send a clear message that those who defied Rome would find no peace, even in the afterlife. Their very remains were used as a deterrent, a grim monument to Roman justice. You see the bodies, left hanging on crosses along the Appian Way, slowly decaying under the relentless sun, becoming food for scavengers, or the bloated corpses floating down the Tiber, a horrifying sight for those living along its banks. This final indignity was a powerful psychological weapon, designed to instill fear in the living and deny peace to the dead. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back, far back, to the heart of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known, ancient Rome. You probably picture mighty legions, grand colosseums, and emperors draped in purple, enjoying spectacular games. Visions of gladiators battling for glory, chariot races thrilling the crowds, and a golden age of entertainment probably fill your mind. But tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on a far darker, more brutal aspect of Roman public life, their executions. Forget the sanitized versions you might have seen. Prepare for a reality where public death was a terrifying spectacle, designed to be far worse than you can possibly imagine. If you were a Roman citizen, you'd probably be more concerned with avoiding the arena floor than cheering from the stands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift back through the millennia, the air growing thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and something else. Something metallic and visceral. You find yourself within the colossal, echoing walls of the Colosseum, the very symbol of Roman entertainment. You might expect the roar of the crowd, the clash of gladiatorial steel. Instead, a different kind of tension hangs in the air, a chilling anticipation that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. This is the stage for Roman public executions, and it's far from the picture of mere entertainment you might imagine.